Kick it.
Ahoy, Nickelodeon fans, and welcome to This Week in Nickelodeon History. My name is Captain Eric, and I'll be covering all of the Nickelodeon anniversaries in between the times of April 3rd to April 9th. That's all of the television shows that have premiered or ended during that time on Nickelodeon. We don't have any Nickelodeon video games to cover this week, but I do have another roaring top 5 for you at the end. But something I did catch this week that was Nickelodeon related was the brand new Paramount Plus series, The Fairly Oddparents, Fairly Odder. An interesting attempt at the Fairly Oddparents series. I don't know what to really think about it. It's so strange and bizarre. It's something that you'd think someone would come up with and would kind of leave the conversation immediately. Like, hey, let's do a sitcom of the Fairly Oddparents. And it not only didn't leave that conversation, they made a full show about it. Not just even a pilot. We have a full season of the Fairly Oddparents, Fairly Odder. And I figured since we were going to be talking so much about Butch today, I might as well give my 2 cents on this. Now, when it comes to Captain Eric as a person, at my core, I legitimately try to be positive. I try to be optimistic as much as I can. So I do want to say there are some positives that I find out of this show. Comes straight down to the voice actors. Darren Norris, Suzanne Blakesley, and surprisingly enough, Carlos Alazraqui playing a live-action version of his character, Denzel Crocker. That alone is worth the price of admission. I'm saying he doesn't come until later in the season, but when Carlos actually gets to be Mr. Crocker, you know, the song and dance with him might be a bit cringe, but to finally see him in the flesh with the mannerisms and the correct voice, it felt good. And it just, I don't know, it reminded me of watching Darren actually getting to play a dad in the Fairly Oddparents movies and seeing how perfect that was. So we're so close to getting a Fairly Oddparents live action world where we can have the proper dad, the proper Mr. Crocker. I'm sure with some prosthetics. He could also play Jorgen, but Darren also plays Jorgen here in this show, who is completely animated. That's pretty much my biggest knock on the show. I don't think it's a good mix for a sitcom in the comedy of the Fairly Oddparents, but I applaud the effort here. But the animation of the characters is just, it's not good. It's not good. And when you can look at animation that was made 20 years ago and point to that and like, hey, that actually looks really fluid. Can we possibly try to emulate that a little bit more while also trying to maintain the budget of a show? And I know probably this is the best we could get with the money that was put up for this show, but I would argue, hey, if you can't make it look as good as something you did 20 years ago, then why do it at all? That's my biggest knock, really, is the animation of the characters. I know everybody's freaking out about the different angles with Mr. Crocker. I mean, look, it's a character that if the design needs to only be seen from one angle, like, that's a kind of a shame. I'm not saying I really prefer the front-faced Crocker. I'm just at least the one image of him when I see like Vicky holding up a picture, that's like a still image of Crocker from the front. Like, that works, but then when it's in motion at the end during the cliffhanger finale, it just, I don't know, it looks wrong. There should have just been an entirely new level of effort with the animation with these characters, especially because there's not that much with the animated characters. It's more on the sitcom end, which, if you're not a fan of sitcoms, is certainly going to make this a rough watch for you. Look, for the idea that the Fairly Oddparents as a series should continue, I'm all for that. But can we just bring the formula back to what worked, in which we can get a nicely animated show of the adventures of Timmy Turner and his two fairies. That's it. That's all. There doesn't need to be any other character involved. There doesn't need to be any other big plot point. The best seasons of the show are when the core of the show is at its focus, and every single attempt at taking that focus away has only diluted the brand. So, I like, even if they announce, hey, we're gonna do a new Fairly Odd Parents season on Paramount Plus exclusively, and we're just gonna ignore Chloe and Poof and even Sparky, like ignore all those characters, just start up of another day at Timmy Turner going to school, getting an F from Mr. Crocker, and seeing where the adventures go on from there with a new set of writers. But the animation has got to look as good as when Fairly Odd Parents was at its peak. Like that is a must. It shouldn't look any choppier than that. Don't do it in computers. And if you have to, make it a way so it doesn't even look like it's done in a computer. That's the whole point. But if you have a Paramount Plus subscription, at least check out some of this show, a little bit of it, just to see what you're talking about online. Don't go off of just the pictures or the slight videos that you may have seen from it. Like, get through one episode. And by the way, whoever is editing this show, why are we having the theme song start like halfway through the episode? It just feels really weird when you go through like a full 10 minutes of plot before they decide, okay, now we have to put the theme in. Like, have the theme start even before any of the plots, or if you're going to do those pre-stinger intro moments, make that like a minute long, a minute and a half. It doesn't need to be longer than that. That's just I don't know, it feels weird. Starting off this week in Nickelodeon history, 37 years ago on April 7th, 1985, the National Geographic Explorer premiered on Nickelodeon. As surprising as that is, the long-running show, simply known these days as Explorer, started out on Nickelodeon on April 7th, only lasted about a year before jumping over to TBS from 1986 to 1999. Then from 99 to 2001, maintained its role on CNBC before moving over for another 3 years till 2004 on MSNBC, before finally having a permanent home on the National Geographic Channel in 2004. Until today, the show is still ongoing. There are 233 episodes of this series, and they have won over 400 awards, including 52 Emmys, 13 Cable Ace Awards, and the Family Television Award. This is crazy. Can you think about this show with all of this pomp and circumstance, this lineage, and you can track its way all the way back 37 years ago on a little humble channel known as Nickelodeon. I think that's really cool. If you are into documentaries, learning about the world, I can't recommend Explorer enough. It's always there. It's quality entertainment. I can't say to go back and watch some of the early stuff. I don't know how accessible that is these days, if the entire catalog of the series is available just in full. I imagine at least in the last couple of years, there has to be a decent amount available streaming-wise. But as far as those early episodes are concerned, who knows? But it's just nice to see that it had its start right here, its humble beginnings on Nickelodeon. 24 years ago, on April 4th, 1998, CatDog premiered on Nickelodeon. Created by Peter Hanna, CatDog ran for 4 seasons of 68 episodes. Talk about an absolute home run out of the gate kind of Nicktoon. Just the concept alone about a dog and a cat attached at the hip, and not being able to obviously leave each other's space, and being complete polar opposites. The classic odd couple narrative redone here in animated form. And even so, in the same decade that we had Ren and Stimpy. This had to be the pitch of the century, walking into Nickelodeon and saying, hey, imagine Ren and Stimpy, but where they're attached with one another. They literally cannot leave each other's side. Boom, you have a hit on your hands. Now, to just call Ren and Stimpy attached together CatDog is completely wrong. CatDog has its own identity, its own brand, its own form of comedy. It's not really, whereas Ren and Stimpy is kind of gross and up-close humor, and then even sometimes those real intense moments where the animation is trying to speak a deeper message to you. CatDog's a lot lighter than that, but it has its own special place in my heart because when I first saw the design of that character, it was one of the first times I can remember as a kid seeing a new Nicktoon and immediately feeling, oh yeah, that's Nicktoon energy right there. I immediately knew that character was Nickelodeon, like connected hand in hand. There was just something about it. I just especially remember seeing the Nickelodeon gummies ad at the time because they made a big deal about adding in CatDog into the lineup of the gummies, and he was like a two-toned colored little gummy character. And there was just something as a kid, you add a second little color onto the gummy, and boom, it just makes it 10 times more magical. But there was something about CatDog that just checkmarked every box you could possibly want in a cartoon. Taking that odd couple type narrative and then building on top of it almost a rubber hose style of animation in which the character would flex and be contorted in a multitude of ways that would never necessarily hurt the character, and the comedy that would even just come around from that alone was enough for the show. But then on top of that, you have this entirely colorful cast of characters, all ranging from different ranges of antagonistic issues with CatDog to very few characters that you could point to as just like true and blue friends, because sometimes even their quote unquote friends would kind of throw CatDog under the bus if they had to. And there was, I don't know, something beautiful about it where at the end of the day, the person attached to you, you could dislike them completely, but you have each other. And there was a nice message in that I really loved. And for those that have never thought about this, big shout out to Jim Cummings, who voiced Cat, but Tom Kenny voicing Dog, one of his best Nicktoon voices here, but following his role from Heifer on Rocko's Minor Life and predating his eventual role as SpongeBob SquarePants right in the 90s. Tom Kenny, one of the MVPs of the Nickelodeon voice acting cast. There's a few others up there, Billy West being one of them. I mean, crucial to the Nicktoons brand getting up off the ground, but Tom Kenny here continuing just such a fantastic level of work that all three characters there, Heifer, Dog, and SpongeBob, all very unique in very different ways. Heifer and Dog more close together than SpongeBob would eventually be. But for Dog here, being, of course, the just classic, cliche, dumb character, would have some real intense moments here up against his other half, and had some wonderful episodes that were centered around him to kind of grow his character beyond just being a doofus that would literally consume anything and everything. Absolutely love CatDog. I do think its later seasons were a bit weaker than the originals. They may have, I don't know, leaned towards more of the supporting cast, which I think in those shows where you build up the world and you build up a lot of side characters, you inevitably have to just, hey, you're maybe running out of stories with the main characters. Let's focus some episodes on some other characters outside of the situation. But I really didn't like those side characters as much as I did CatDog. Now, one thing, Rancid Rabbit as an antagonist, one of my favorites in the Nicktoon world of the villains, antagonists. He very much reminded me of Pete from the old Disney Mickey Mouse shorts, or even like Elmer Fudd or Yosemite Sam, in a way that every single time you saw this character, he was in a completely different role, in a different job, of course, to fit whatever CatDog was doing on that said day. But the fact that this guy seemed to just always be in the way of CatDog, it like annoyed me as a kid. But it was that kind of archetype of a villain I also really liked, because it just reminded me of those classic cartoons. Because everywhere Mickey would go, Pete would have to be involved and be doing something else, or everywhere Bugs Bunny would show up. Sometimes Yosemite Sam is a pirate, and sometimes he's in the Wild West, and sometimes he's in the jungle, and just those random moments where it's like, oh, really? We can't go anywhere in the world. We can't go anywhere in Nierberg without running into this rabbit. He literally works everywhere. I love that. I love that kind of villain here. If you have never seen CatDog, I would love to give you my top 5 CatDog episodes at the end of this episode, but unfortunately I'm going to hold that off for another few months when we swing back around to CatDog. I'll be featuring another show in today's episode. In fact, our next show that we are covering, a show that Butch Hartman created 18 years ago on April 3rd, 2004. We are talking, of course, of Danny Phantom, one of my personal favorite Nicktoons. The show was created by Butch and developed by Steve Marmel, and it ran for 3 seasons of 53 episodes. Nickelodeon's first cartoons centered around a superhero, Danny Phantom, with some of the most unique superpowers that, at the time, I had heard of. I never heard of a superhero having ghost powers, the ability of flight, the ability to travel in between walls, to turn invisible, the ability to take over others' bodies, to be able to shoot energy out of your hands, to use freeze powers, of course, the multitude of other powers that would eventually unlock throughout the show. But just from the concept alone, like, that just blew my mind. So from the concept, I became a fan. But then what I found was ongoing stories that would reference one another. It paid off to watch the show. It wasn't necessarily a show that was serialized in a way that you needed to watch each and every episode. But if you did, you were almost rewarded for it. You then saw plot points progress, moments in time that would be referenced episode to episode. You know, the whole saga of Jazz finding out that her brother is an alternate ghost superhero hybrid and holding on to that secret from episode to episode. It doesn't necessarily really matter of the plot at hand, the ghost of the week, but if you're watching and paying attention, it adds to the story. It adds to the drama. So I always appreciated that. It was just a unique way of telling a Nicktoon that we just really didn't have before. I mean, there, of course, are certainly moments in other Nicktoons before Danny Phantom where a new character premiered and then they were in the show from then on, or something big happened in the show or a character got a new job and then thereon it stayed as part of the plots. This is something different where you're actually almost following a separate plot throughout each episode. It is the serialized nature of Danny Phantom. Like, the B plot is what's ongoing throughout the Ghost of the Week stuff, and just that alone made me such a fan, a PHAN, a fan of Danny Phantom, and fell in love with the character, fell in love with the design, fell in love with the ghosts. I love that so many of the ghost villains were based off of, other mediums, and they were just then contorted in a way that worked in this world. You can see where the parody was. It sometimes, like the guys in white being a play on the Men in Black, like, boom, that alone. It's not high sophisticated comedy there, but just the fact that they were building this world with all these kind of ghost puns and parodies of other properties, I just adored it. This show, unfortunately, was not taken as seriously, in my opinion, as Nickelodeon should have. They should have invested as hard into Danny Phantom as they did for Avatar. There should have been more Danny Phantom video games, 3D brawling, flying around video games. There should have been more toys for Danny Phantom, as there should have been more for Avatar. I'm glad to see more merchandise now coming out for the show and the always possible revival of the show, but I just really wish at the time they did more. And there were some cross promotions for Danny Phantom during its run. There was, of course, one big one for Burger King that I wish I collected more of the toys for. There was a cross promotion with Captain Crunch. There was some push for Danny Phantom behind the scenes. There was an actual ice cream bar where you could get those notorious gumball eyes in your Danny Phantom, your green gumball eyes for your ghost popsicle. And I even convinced an ice cream man at the time to give me the poster that advertised the ice cream, and he was nice enough to give it to me. I still have it somewhere. So when you look at these cross promotions, there certainly was some of an attempt to push Danny Phantom more in the public consciousness, but I just think, I don't know, there could have been something more special here that could have come from this show. The way it was treated by the end was abysmal. I remember being on the Butch Hartman forums during the 2005, 2006 era of time, and people constantly freaking out about not knowing when season 3 would air. It would air in other parts of the world. All these episodes would leak, and just in America it was just radio silent on when new episodes would come out. And it's just, every other channel seems to understand, you have a schedule for a show, you release that episode, episode to episode, week to week on that schedule, and that's it. You have like 13 weeks of content here. And it just seems like Nickelodeon was like struggling with this. They didn't know what to do. They eventually just dumped the batch of season 3 into 2 separate week-long events, interestingly titled Phantomania and Phantomania 2, which was the worst one because that was the last batch of episodes, including the finale, and it felt like the lamest push for these episodes out. Like Phantomania 2, you're just copying the same thing you did a couple weeks ago, where you just kind of shadow dumped the beginning of season 3. And also, to be fair, months earlier, before the dump of season 3 on the air, they aired I think it's like the 6th episode of season 3, Urban Jungle, completely out of order, just to promote this like big event that also had Mark Hamill guest starring as a ghost. They like made this whole TV special event out of this one single episode that really wasn't like a half-hour special or anything. It like wasn't anything big. It was just a random episode of season 3, and they aired it months before everything else. But when I meant like the serialized part of Danny Phantom comes into play here, there are moments in this episode that reference a previous episode of season 3. And it's just bizarre that this happened like this. So, for example, because now that I actually pulled up the list of episodes, in the 2nd episode of season 3, called Infinite Realms, Danny, trying to map out parts of the ghost zone, ends up meeting a new friend named Frostbite, who, starts out, I think, as an antagonist in that episode, but by the end becomes friends with Danny. Frostbite then shows back up in this 6th episode to then help Danny unlock his freeze powers. So you meet Frostbite in 2, and he returns in 6. But season 3 didn't air properly. They just aired 6. So there's this entire chunk of the episode involving this character where they've previously met before. And I remember watching that live going like, this is airing out of order. This is crazy. I didn't like know as much now of the placements and whatnot of where these episodes were, but it felt so bizarre that by the end it was just tossed to the wayside. But of all that negativity I just dumped out onto you, the positive, optimistic side of Captain Eric coming out now is that we did get a proper end to the show. Phantom Planet didn't leave us a hole that needed to be covered up after all these years, like some other Nicktoons where you just leave this big old cliffhanger and you have to address it. There was a proper ending. There was a proper send-off here, a legitimate series finale of a Nicktoon, one of which we don't usually get with these shows. Nickelodeon really doesn't like last episodes kind of acknowledging it's the last episode, because the idea being, as you consistently air these cartoons over and over again, you don't have to have that sense of finality. I think by this point in Nickelodeon's run, they were more okay with these more finality ending Nicktoon episodes. But certainly we weren't used to it, so it was really nice to see. As far as Nickelodeon doing anything more with Danny Phantom, other than the show just straight coming back for a proper season with the original animation crew involved, or at least the majority of them, and for the show to at least obtain some of its writing staff from the original show, anything other than that, I really wouldn't be interested in it. There's just something special about that show, and I kind of want to see more artist renditions of title cards. That's the one thing I've not mentioned yet about Danny Phantom. One of my favorite parts of this show are its title cards, each one looking like its own cover of a Danny Phantom comic book. I would absolutely love to have a mural of all of those title cards as a part of my office decor in the future. So we'll see about that. But if you've never watched Danny Phantom, I have my top 5 episodes of Danny Phantom coming up in a little bit for you. So stay tuned for that. So yeah, anybody who have worked on that show, on Danny Phantom, on CatDog, thank you so much for making my childhood as wonderful as it was. I love the work you've put out. Even if you worked on one episode for one minor detail, from the bottom of my heart, thank you very much. 16 years ago, on April 9th, 2006, Just for Kicks premiered on Nickelodeon. Created by Alana Senko, the show was also developed by Whoopi Goldberg. And although you think with Whoopi behind this, something big would come out of this property, but unfortunately it only ran for one season of 13 episodes. It also for a few years became one of the most forgotten series, and apparently no reruns of this show ever really aired on Nickelodeon, and therefore it kind of became lost over the internet until May 2nd, 2016, almost 10 years after its original premiere. The entire series was uploaded onto YouTube, just out of the blue. So it goes to show you that after a certain point in time, I feel like there's no television property that has ever really truly lost. It just, somebody out there has a tape of everything, and it just, when and where does that tape make its way into the hands of somebody who can upload it onto the internet? I feel like any property that aired on television after like 95, I'd say is a safe bet that somebody has a recording of it somewhere, and the only hope is that they eventually upload it to YouTube so that it can be at least somewhat preserved if the original owners aren't going to do it themselves. 14 years ago, on April 5th, 2008, the final episode of Just Jordan premiered on Nickelodeon. Created by Allison Taylor, the show ran for 2 seasons of 29 episodes. 7 years ago, on April 4th, 2015, the final episode of T.U.F.F. Puppy premiered on Nickelodeon. Created by Butch Hartman, the show ran for 3 seasons of 60 episodes. Butch's third series with Nickelodeon, following The Fairly Oddparents and Danny Phantom. T.U.F.F. Puppy was still a moderate hit with critics and fans, but definitely didn't reach the levels of popularity that both The Fairly Oddparents and Danny Phantom had met. Even when you look at the idea of the television movie coming into play, The Fairly Oddparents, more than a handful of TV movies. Danny Phantom, more than a handful of TV movies. And that was the one thing I was really waiting for. Like, if we get a T.U.F.F. Puppy TV movie, it at least should be on par with everything else that Butch has ever put out in a television movie form, because they're all at least serviceable. Even the live-action Fairly Oddparents movies, they're serviceable. But we didn't get one with T.U.F.F. Puppy, and that's a real shame, because I thought that there was a lot of promise with this show that I thought, other than the fact that it was all starring animals, could find a nice balance between the heavy action of Danny Phantom and the heavy comedy of The Fairly Oddparents, and find something in the middle. And, I think in ways they certainly achieved that. This certainly is not a failure in any regard, being that it might not be as successful as those other shows. I mean, look, fact is, you'd think by the third idea, somebody would truly run out of ideas. But I really don't think that's the case with T.U.F.F. Puppy. There's a lot to be found here that I enjoy. I might not enjoy it as those other 2 shows, but that doesn't mean that this shouldn't exist, or that it's weird that it even lasted as long as it did. Quite the opposite. It's not weird that it lasted as long as it was, because there was a decent amount to be found in this show. It certainly was an enjoyable show for a lot of fans out there. And if you are a fan of T.U.F.F. Puppy, I would certainly like to know what your thoughts are in the comments below. 4 years ago, on April 8th, 2018, the television show School of Rock finished its run on Nickelodeon. Developed for the television by Jim Armogida and Steve Armogida, the show ran for 3 seasons of 45 episodes. The show is based off of the movie School of Rock, which was written by Mike White and directed by Richard Linklater, starring Jack Black as a struggling musician who then takes over the role of a substitute teacher from his roommate, posing as his roommate at a school, and then taking it upon himself to take this preppy class of students, teaching them the art of rock and roll, teaching them instruments, while avoiding the principal of the school, one of those like stick up the bum teachers, played by Joan Cusack. It's one of my favorite Jack Black movies. I'm an absolutely massive Jack Black mark. I have no problem in saying that. That movie first premiered on October 3rd, 2003, and if you've never seen it, it is absolutely worth the watch. It's Jack Black at his finest. It's everything about him that makes him unique in one beautiful package of just like a nice movie. It's got a nice message to it. The music's great. The acting is wonderful. And hey, surprise, surprise, this was also one of the biggest roles early on for Miranda Cosgrove, who after this would, of course, then go on to play Megan on Drake and Josh, and then, of course, Carly in iCarly, still playing Carly on iCarly on Paramount Plus all these years later. So everything goes around full circle. I never checked out the show. It's a Jack Black thing. It's also the sitcom element. I'm glad that they did a show like this because it is a story that I think, would work really well as a television show, especially a comedy here. Now, of course, they don't have Jack Black in the role, but the character that Jack Black played in the movie is still the character of this show, at this time being played by Tony Cavallero. So congratulations on that role. Congratulations all involved. 3 seasons is a great run for a Nickelodeon sitcom here. If you were a fan of School of Rock, let me know in the comments below. If you have never seen the movie and you happen to watch it off of my recommendation, I would certainly like to know what you think about it in the comments below. 2 years ago, on April 6th, 2020, Ollie's Pack premiered on Nickelodeon. Created by Pedro Eboli and Graham Peterson, the show is still ongoing, and it's in its first season of 27 episodes. And before we leave today, I'd like to give you Captain Eric's Top 5 of the week, going over my top 5 episodes of Danny Phantom. Now, other than the number 1 episode on my list, the other 4 were a little bit more difficult to come across because I've never actually listed out my top 5 here. And it was a case of just kind of scrolling through the episodes until one of the titles would just bounce at me, because I've seen all of these episodes so many times, and you would think, well, that should kind of narrow it down. Here's the thing. I like most episodes of Danny Phantom. They're not really any ones that are bad. And if so, those are some outliers that then make it still hard when there's like 10 episodes, 15 episodes left to pull from. So these are my top 5. Number 5, the episode Boxed Up Fury from season 3. My number 1 favorite episode from season 3. There's something about season 3 that feels a little off. I can't really put my finger on it, but the fact that Boxed Up Fury exists is just something that like warms my heart, because if you're not familiar with Danny Phantom, one of the long-running jokes of the show is the character the Box Ghost, who comedically, voiced by Rob Paulson, by the way, comedically is trying to constantly use boxes and box-related things in his plans, and they're a joke. He is a joke character, and this is his episode. It's his time to show the world that he needs to be taken seriously as the Box Ghost comes across the most famous box in history, Pandora's Box. If that doesn't make you want to watch that episode alone, I don't know what will. Number 4, Splitting Images from season 1, an episode that sees Danny trading places with a bullied ghost of a nerd of the Amity Park High School who is trapped apparently in a purgatory of the 1930s. Stuck in this just alternate universe where he's just constantly tormented. He sees Danny being a bit of a bully in the episode, only it's Danny really sticking up for himself against other bullies and maybe taking things a little too far, but he ends up having to switch places with the nerd in this other universe, Sidney Poindexter, who then ends up taking over Danny's body and trying to then right the wrongs by being nice to those who were actually bullying Danny. It is an episode that obviously deals with bullying and whatnot, but just the whole concept of the show and a ghost being stuck in an alternate past and just everything about it's cool. I like that they continued to use Sidney Poindexter in the show as just an ongoing antagonist against Danny being a bully. Like that, the fact that it was set up here and then continued, absolutely love. Number 3, Masters of All Time. An episode that, of course, deals with time travel, which I enjoy as a plot device when it's done right. But this one also gives us an idea as to what went down with Vlad Masters and the Fentons in their college days, and deals with an alternate future in which it's Jack Fenton who gets poisoned by this ghost energy and becomes the bitter rival of Danny. It's an absolutely bizarre episode. It certainly takes some cues from Back to the Future, but seeing this alternate world, this alternate timeline is just one of my favorite things, because it's hard to really talk about it because it's going to spoil the next one in line, but I really love the dynamic between Danny and Vlad. That brings us to number 2 here, Bitter Reunions, the episode that introduces us to the character of Vlad Masters, who is a bitter rival, the former friend of Jack Fenton from college, who had his life ruined by the ghost experiments that Jack was working on, and then forced to deal with this ectoacne, and then eventually finding out that he himself is half ghost like Danny. And when he takes his ghost form, I mean, it's just one of the most perfectly designed villains I can think of. The look between the two is just, it's something I adore. And the beginning of that rivalry in this episode is just, it's amazing. As I remember watching this and just coming across, here we are, like, not only another character dealing with what Danny is dealing with, but a proper main villain, an arch nemesis, who of course makes his presence known as many times as possible throughout the series, and the fact that it traces itself all the way to Bitter Reunions is why I love that episode. But if you're a Danny Phantom fan, I would probably like to guess that my number 1 episode is your number 1 episode, because it's probably the most beloved episode in the series. That is The Ultimate Enemy. My number 1 favorite episode is also a TV movie for Danny Phantom, and is probably the best TV movie in Nickelodeon history, if anything right under the Jimmy Timmy Power Hour. But nonetheless, The Ultimate Enemy is an absolute roller coaster of a ride from beginning to end. Tells an absolute banger of a story that involves Danny, involves time travel, involves Vlad, involves other characters. We get to see more of the ghosts. This is like the biggest thing in Danny Phantom. And I'm not going to spoil anything, because if you've never seen it, I want you to watch it, and I want you to roll with it. Enjoy that episode. Please, if there's any Danny Phantom episode you watch, certainly The Ultimate Enemy. Now, given the serialized nature of the show, there are certainly moments in that episode that are more enjoyable to watch if you've seen everything up to that point. So, hey, look, if I can convince you to watch one Danny Phantom episode, then watch Bitter Reunions. But watching the show in its entirety is short, it's sweet, it's worth the time, it's worth the effort putting into it, and it is worth watching all the episodes up until Ultimate Enemy, because it is a thrill ride that Nickelodeon has very rarely ever attempted to get even close to in quality. There's been some moments in Nickelodeon history that are up there, but I don't mean to overhype this TV movie, but it just legitimately is one of the best. It's creme de la creme. The cream rises to the top. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Captain Eric, and that is This Week in Nickelodeon History. Thank you for listening. I truly appreciate it. If you enjoy the podcast or any of the work I put out, any of your support by liking, subscribing, sharing my my podcasts or videos around the internet to any other fans you think may enjoy it, all of that is always greatly appreciated. And I cannot thank you enough for being a part of the Ready Crew. So as always, once again, my name is Captain Eric. We will see you here next week. Please stay safe, everybody. Thank you.
On the Lord Hut, here a hut, Nick. On the Lord Hut, here a hut, Nick. On the Ricky Ticky Low, while living #1 Nickelodeon.